Good afternoon. This is Krista King Oaks, Youth Services Consultant at the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. Thank you for joining today's training titled Everything You Wanted to Know About Youth Services But Were Too Scared to Ask. Just a couple of reminders before we get going on the content that certificates along with handouts and a recording available in the KDLA Archives webinars page is typically sent out within 1 week from the live training date. So keep an eye on your inbox at that time, and we appreciate your patience. None of this training would be made possible without the support and funding from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. I hope you will be able to stick around at the end of today's training to fill out a very brief survey so that we can maintain our funding and support from IMLS. For those of you that are also listening to the recorded archive, you can also access the survey link. If at any time you have issues with the audio during the training, please make sure your computer speakers are unmuted and turned up. If you continue to have sound issues, navigate to the top bar of the screen, click on Meetings, then Audio Setup Wizard. Also, please feel free to indicate in the chat box and we will do our best to assist. With that being said, we're going to move into today's content. We're very excited to be able to offer this webinar today. It's a new format for us, or at least myself. So a little note about how all of this will work. We're going to stick to a hard 60 minutes. Leading up to today's training, we solicited questions from across the listserv and came up with three very unique and diverse questions that just so happen to address some of our broadest areas of concern as youth services librarians. We have one question devoted to policy involving children's services, another to policy and advocacy related to teen services, and then general community needs assessments around diversity and inclusion. I did receive one other question less than an hour ago, so unfortunately that did not make the cut into the official slides. However, if we do have time as we approach the end of today's training, I'll be happy to review that. As we are going along today, you will have options to ask for clarification, submit additional questions. Please go ahead and do so in the chat box, and we will address those as they come up. Most importantly, please keep in mind, and I hope you'll feel comfortable sharing at the end, please let us know how KDLA can provide follow-up support, whether through future webinars, face-to-face training, or other additional resources on any of the topics that we cover today. As you can see, I asked the poll question at the beginning of today's webinar about how many years of service those of you who are attending today have provided for children's services in public libraries, and so I think we have a really great representation of some fresh new voices as well as some seasoned wise veterans. So I hope everybody will be able to share honestly about their experiences. That being said, because of the nature of today's training, I do want just to remind of a couple pieces of etiquette. This training, as well as all KDLA trainings, are harassment-free spaces. Just as I always told kids and teens when I was working in public libraries, there's no such thing as a dumb question, so please feel free to ask openly and honestly in the chat box if you don't understand anything that was discussed or if you just have further clarification on a topic. Do not take criticisms or debates personally. We should all be respectful and mindful of each other's unique experiences. If it feels real to you, then it is real to you. However, be ready to defend your perspective with resources that I hope you will share in the chat box. So, moving forward, we're going to get into our very first question. I will preface this by saying this is probably our most complex question that also involves some legal issues. So bear with us. There are a lot of slides related to this next topic, so I hope that it will provide a really great conversation. So question number 1. Are you allowed to call the parents of a child being disruptive in the library? How do you even find the parent's number if you wanted to talk to them about their child's behavior? This question was also submitted with the following comment that this library receives several after-school kids who visit on foot with no supervision. I'm sure at one point or another, many of us have probably encountered a similar situation. However, anytime when there is some legal questions involved, myself and the other consultants at KDLA like to turn to our state librarian and commissioner for some advice. From time to time, he will appear on the Children's and Youth Services listserv, so the following comments come directly from the state librarian. We agree that this question submitted is potentially a difficult topic and that there is no one quote-unquote correct answer. Like most situations involving live people, the answer depends upon the situation, or as the commissioner is fond of saying in legal circles, it is fact-specific. That being stated, in Kentucky, patron privacy is permissive in nature. Libraries are not required to release the patron's information. However, they are neither forbidden from doing so. Therefore, if there is a legitimate reason for the information to be released, such as a child's name or phone number, the library may do so without violation of the law, though there could be civil liability if the information were misused and the release were not reasonable. However, there is a statute that is linked to something called good faith reporting in the LRC. The link will take you directly to the individual statute, and we'll get a little bit more into detail about what exactly good faith reporting means in a few moments. The commissioner also wanted to remind you that in no state is it legal to leave children less than 8 years old without supervision, and the library should not undertake the supervision of underage children. The next slide goes into more detail about Kentucky's specific laws. As we stated earlier, Kentucky has no minimum age at which children may be left alone. However, there is clarification about reporting, and this is where the previous slide mentioned the coverage for good faith reporting. Under KRS 620.030, parenthetical 1, any person who knows or has reasonable cause to believe that a child is dependent, neglected, or abused shall immediately cause an oral or written report to be made to a local law enforcement agency or the Kentucky State Police, the cabinet or its designated representative, the Commonwealth Attorney, or the county attorney by telephone or otherwise. So, therefore, there are several avenues for outreach dependent upon the urgency of the situation. General advice is something that is immediately going to be causing physical danger to the child or anyone else in the building. Obviously, emergency individuals should be called. Please dial 911. However, if it is a suspected case of neglect, then you can go through the less urgent route of submitting a written report to the Cabinet for Health and Family Services or any of the other designated individuals in this list. And the next slides will go into further detail of how to do that. Here is a link to the website for the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services, one of KDLA's partners in state government. The URL is chss.ky.gov. The URL underneath, which links directly to the page titled Child Safety, has forms and further directions about just how to submit a written report on child neglect. The Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services investigates instances where a child less than 8 years old is left unattended. You have either the option of submitting a written report or calling the Child Protection Hotline. There is both a local and toll-free number. They also have a very in-depth, multi-page booklet titled Reporting Abuse in Kentucky that can also be accessed from their website. It goes into definitions by Kentucky state law of what is considered to be abuse, as well as, most importantly, what is not considered to be abused. One such example, which gets asked a lot during this type of training, is what about corporal punishment? Corporal punishment is still not banned by Kentucky law as long as there are not any visible marks or bruising to the child. However, to further break down this question, we're going to investigate the issue of patron privacy. You'll remember that the second part of the question asks, if you know the name of the child and know that they have a library card, are you legally allowed to look them up in your system and look for parental contact information, or is that breaking patron privacy guidelines? Per the Commissioner and State Librarian, patron privacy does not apply to legitimate in-house use. Therefore, any staff member with a legitimate need may have access to patron records, and in the case of a minor, the parent is legally responsible. Therefore, they have a legal right to know about overdues or behavioral problems. That being said, staff should not be allowed to browse patron records just out of curiosity or for any prurient interest. At this point, I would like to bring up a popular phrase that gets discussed in library school curriculum. That is the phrase, in loco parentis. As defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, it means in the place of a parent, and it specifically relates to school officials acting in loco parentis or in place of the parent. Schools operate in loco parentis. Public libraries do not act in loco parentis. This is one of the biggest differences between how school libraries operate and public libraries operate. Again, another reminder, patron privacy is permissive in nature in the state of Kentucky. Libraries are not required to release the patron's information, but neither are they forbidden from doing so. However, this is something we do want to keep in mind, especially involving any partnerships with schools and any issues concerning privacy issues related to minors in the public library. Here are some additional resources that may be helpful for further reading on this topic, as well as staff and training development. The National Safe Kids campaign recommends that no child under the age of 12 be left alone. Their website is www.safekids.org/safe-kids-united-states. Another great partner to KDLA is a nonprofit organization based out of Lexington, Kentucky called Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky. Their website is www.pcaky.org. If you recall, we held a training, an online training that can be viewed in the KDLA archive webinars page back in February on Prevent Child Abuse Awareness Month, which is annually every April. They also provided some sessions during this year's Kentucky Public Library Association Conference. If you or your library staff are interested in receiving materials from PCAC or in more in-depth training, please contact myself and I'd be happy to put you in touch with their organization. Another very helpful piece of procedure and policy your library may want to look into that's related to this topic is that of missing children. I have linked to a website and an organization called Code Adam. The website is codeadam.missingkids.org. This gives you sample policies and procedures to how to identify and make alerts to local law enforcement when a child is reported to have been missing in your immediate environment. Policy and legal issues aside, one sure way to try and prevent unwanted behavior is to make sure that library staff is being proactive and interacting with the children that you are currently serving. Interacting will go a long way toward controlling disruptive behavior, and therefore spend some time with your team to reflect authentically about your current services and programs. Are your programming interesting and engaging to the juvenile population found in your library? For example, everybody loves preschool story time. Who doesn't like cute babies? However, if that's the only program you're offering, it probably won't appeal to many of our tween and teen populations. Also, don't be afraid to create boundaries and be very strict and honest about those boundaries. Tweens and teens need rules, and they will respect you for your use of authority. That being said, do work hard towards creating a routine. When they have expectations, they're more likely to settle into a normative behavioral pattern. Create a reoccurring after-school program schedule that can be set up for any sort of programming, whether it's kids who are showing up every day or those just dropping in. Examples might be video game clubs, after-school art programs, passive STEM programming, or just an open meeting space with snacks and board games. Something else you may want to consider is the idea of trauma-informed care, and that disruptive or negative behavior always has a source, whether or not it is apparent on the surface. Are you and your staff being empathetic? Are you seeing all backgrounds and points of view, or do you have your own personal bias clouding your perspective? For more information on trauma-informed care, visit the Governor's Office for Early Childhood website at kidsnow.ky.gov. Click under the tab for professionals. You will find information related to an initiative called Kentucky Strengthening Families, of which the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives is a leader in. You will find ready-to-go training materials, as well as staff at KDLA to provide more training on this topic. So that wraps up our first question. Before moving on to the next topic, please indicate in the chat whether you have any further questions or comments about the previous topic of unattended children in the library. As a reminder, when we get to the end of today's training, in the files download box, there is a sample unattended child policy provided by our state librarian that can be customized for your own library's needs. All right, looks like there are no additional questions at this time in the chat, so we will move on to our second topic, which is teen services advocacy. We received the following question from our peers. How can I convince my administration that teens are important patrons and not to be instantly suspicious of them? How can I create a fun YA space when I constantly run up against library staff concerned about noise and vandalism from teens? I believe library staff are against encouraging teens to use the library. First, let's dispel a few myths about teen library usage across the United States. The following statistics were provided in the most recent report of Pew Research Services about teens and millennial use of libraries. 3/4 of Americans believe it is a high priority for local public libraries to offer a safe place where teenagers can study and congregate. 1/3 of teens between the ages of 12 to 18 visited the public library 10 times a year or more. I also want to point out that when we are talking about teen library services, we will be using the definition provided by the YALSA Association, which is the Teen Services Division of the American Library Association. They define teens as 12 to 18 years old. 60% of teens who go online use public library internet access to do so. Therefore, not everybody has access to public to library usage in their own individual homes or internet-ready devices. That being said, only half of public libraries employ one full-time staff person dedicated to teen services. So why would libraries need teens? Teens can be great volunteers around the library, whether it is helping to shelve additional books, clean toys in the children's department, or participate in a service-oriented program, as you see in this picture from a program at the Boone County Public Library in Northern Kentucky called Read with a Teen, where high school students mentor younger children in grades kindergarten through third grade during the summer to teach them how to read. Naturally, if you serve teens and provide engaging, meaningful experiences for them, they will become natural allies and advocates for the library, as well as each other, which will be more important as we go on to a conversation in a few minutes about the importance of peer culture in teen communities. Most importantly, teens are our future taxpayer base, and public libraries in Kentucky and across the United States would not survive without the support of local tax funding. A reminder, and I cannot take credit for this graphic, this came from Teen Services Librarian Jesse Griffith with the Kenton County Public Library, that you want to be very mindful of your service population. It's not just the teens coming in through your front door, hanging out in your library, using your computers, but the teens that you visit through outreach, the teens who may only participate in summer reading, teen readers who may only access digital resources on your website and never enter your physical space, as well as the teens that don't yet use the library. How can you reach and serve everyone? Also, a little bit of a reminder about where some of the more disruptive and frustrating behavior at this age of development comes from. There is a part of the brain located in the front region called the amygdala. This piece of the brain is important for process information and making judgments. It is also associated with emotional and gut responses and risk-taking. However, it is the final part of the brain to fully develop and does not finish growing until individuals are well within their 20s. Furthermore, there's a really great book by author Sarah Jane Blakemore titled The Mysterious Workings of the Adolescent Brain. Blakemore says that the brain continues to develop right through adolescence and into the 20s and 30s. During adolescence, there is a significant decline in gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex. This is the region of the brain governing social decisions and thinking about other people is more active in adolescence than it is in adults. And as well as the importance of the environment in shaping that growing brain. The environment, not just the physical environment, but the social, emotional environment of other teens and adult role models. A reminder, again, one of my favorite quotes says that bad behavior comes from somewhere. I've linked in this slide, and I'll put a link in the chat for a 5-minute video that you can watch on your own time. It is about ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it provides some more context about some of traumatic events that individuals can go through that unfortunately may have long-lasting impacts well into adulthood on one's health, physical, mental, as well as their ability to be engaged lifelong learners and contributing community citizens. Out of a recent study conducted in 2016 of all of the states in the country, Kentucky ranked the 5th highest for adults living with 3 or more ACEs. After you see this video, that will make more sense to you. ACEs is also the foundational research behind the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative mentioned in previous slides. Another framework to help you evaluate and justify your teen programming is something called the 40 Developmental Aspects. These lists of assets were created by the Search Institute nearly 30 years ago, and they were targeted specifically for adolescents aged 12 to 14. There are a list of 40 internal and external assets based upon everything from helping to shape respect for neighbors and individuals in the community to providing safe space to spend out-of-school hours and contribute in a meaningful way. I encourage you and your staff and your team to ask what are we already doing in the library to address the developmental assets and where can we play a bigger part. There will be a page with all of the assets listed in today's handout. Just a brief overview. This slide shows how those with fewer developmental assets have higher scenarios of engaging in risky behavior, such as violence, illicit drug use, and other undesirable behaviors. Conversely, the next graphic shows that teens and young people with more assets exhibit positive social behavior, such as leadership, valuing diversity, being successful in school, career, and extracurricular activities, as well as exhibiting leadership skills. Therefore, to address teens' priorities, libraries need to, 1, assess what types of teens are using their library or not using your library and why. Number 2, assess the amount of library staff dedicated to teen services. In the previous slides, we mentioned that research from the American Library Association, the Pew Research Center, identified that less than half of public libraries in the U.S. have only 1 or less full-time staff member dedicated to teen services. How is that equitable to the staffing of other departments? And lastly, have your team assess current library programming, outreach, and marketing models to the reality of teens' needs in daily lives. The following graphic comes from the Young Adult Library Services Association, or YALSA for short. That is the Teen Services Division of the American Library Association, and relates to their new initiative on teen-centered programming. You can download an extensive guide at the end of today's presentation that takes a deeper dive into something called the Teen Services Competencies that covers all of these various literacies that those working with teens in the library should be familiar with, whether it is the actual teen librarian to circulation, public libraries, or public services staff, up to directors. There's also information that assists directors and managers with hiring qualified candidates to serve teens in their libraries. We also have a recent archived webinar available through the KDLA archived webinar website. It was recorded live this past February and called You Can Hamago 2, Connected Learning in 21st Century Teen Library Services. This was done in collaboration with academic researchers from the University of Maryland who presented at the 2017 YALSA Symposium. Hamago is a really fun acronym that stands for hanging out, messing around, and geeking out. This speaks to the issues around teen programming that, again, another myth, it often looks like teens are just hanging out and not really doing anything compared to how programs look for younger children. This is not true. A lot of the important work around social emotional development, which is critical for this stage of adolescent development, is often going on in teen programming. By the nature of teen programming is often more unstructured to encourage critical 21st century learning skills such as problem solving, collaboration, and teamwork. There's a link on this slide again to the YALSA competencies, but this will be available as a download at the end of today's training. I would also recommend visiting the website teenlibrariantoolbox.com for a great primer on how to get started with teen programming if you are new to it. At this time, please go ahead and submit any questions you may have on this topic in the chat box. There is one question that has been submitted. Do teens need to pass a background check to volunteer at the library? That is a great question. We will get some further clarification from our state librarian and share that on the kayak listserv. However, it is recommended that most volunteers, anybody you have volunteering in your library, should go through some sort of standard background check process. And if nothing else, that they need to go through an application process. If you're looking for examples of teen volunteer applications, please indicate that on the kayak listserv, and that's something we would be happy to share examples with you. I'll wait a couple more seconds before moving on to our third topic. And before we move on to our third topic, I'd like to say that this question of teen advocacy and teen services, the responses and content came from a much more in-depth 2-hour training that we provide at KDLA's Public Library Institute. So if anybody is more interested in taking a deeper dive on this topic, please contact me at the end of today's training. Now we're moving on to our third and final question that was submitted. How do you encourage diversity in a small rural community? Just as we've done the previous topic, we're going to dispel some myths around the concept of rural diversity. Most people believe that there is no diversity in small or rural communities, and according to recent research, that is not true. Rural communities are not monocultural. Not only will you find various faith communities and diversity such as Amish, you'll also find other ethnic and racial diversity, as well as economic diversity. And we'll go and take a deeper dive into those statistics in the following slides. According to a research article on the website Teaching Tolerance, cited below, that was titled Appreciate the Diversity in Rural Places, 1/4 of students in rural communities are not white. Lots of educators and youth advocates recommend building programming around place-based learning or learning more about the history and culture of one's own community to grow a deeper appreciation and empathetic awareness of other and different communities. This also, again, leads to the 21st century learning skills, such as problem solving. And extensive and ongoing community participation is critical to the success of a multicultural place. The following are some projections from the Pew Research Center. The graphic on the left-hand side of the screen, it has ethnic and racial demographics as recent as 2016. However, when compared to the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the shifts that are projected to occur by 2045, so about 25 years away, where once called now minority communities will be growing in size compared to white populations. However, we don't want to look at diversity through just one lens. We want to also consider it through other avenues and channels, such as poverty. So this shows a racial breakdown of poverty in the U.S. And then the following slide takes a look at religious diversity in the U.S. and just the plethora of various faith experiences and traditions that are apparent in our country. From a 2016 article on publiclibrariesonline.org titled Encouraging Diversity and Equity in Public Libraries, the article reminds us that a year-round community organization with free membership and access to resources libraries serve crucial roles in community education and dialogue. This means we should be representing diversity in our collections, across our programming, across our points of outreach, as well as across our staff and board of trustees. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily have to look racially or ethnically different if that's not what is available in your community, but just simple differences of experiences. Something as simple as reaching out to a new organization that you have never partnered with before will naturally bring on a different and a diverse point of view. Something really simple to do in a small community to test the waters is just to simply make sure your collection is representing experiences and individuals different from your own. Here we have graphics from the campaign We Need Diverse Books. This has different individuals showing reasons why we need diverse books. A famous quote is that we need diverse books because they are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. High quality youth literature or literature of any kind should be a reflection of one's own experience, i.e. a mirror, but also a window or a doorway onto someone else's experience that is different from your own. You also see some topics and issues that we have addressed in our earlier slides and conversations, everything from bringing more empathy and compassion into the world and just sharing different perspectives. The following are good rules of thumb for helping to identify whether or not your current collection are representing diverse cultures respectfully. Some questions you want to ask yourself when you're evaluating literature. Are the characters represented as having a broad range of emotions? Can the characters solve problems on their own, or do they have to turn to a white character for assistance? Do the characters actively participate in the story and have leadership roles? And are the characters culturally stereotyped, whether through descriptions of their appearances, their dialogue, jobs that they do or do not have? Those are all examples of stereotypes. If you're not familiar with our current National Ambassador for Youth Literature, his name is Jean Lewin Yang. He is a graphic novelist and the author of the Prince Award-winning title, American-Born Chinese. This is a graphic from his national campaign called Reading Without Walls. That is also the name of the website where you can go and download more information on a reading challenge to share with all of your customers. The challenge issues everything from reading literature in different formats you're not familiar with, such as comic books and graphic novels, to reading stories of characters who do not live where you are from. There's free promotional material and posters all available at the Reading Without Walls website. Here's a list of additional resources that you may want to look into after today's training. The various articles from American libraries and public libraries online, as well as training from Web Junction on racial equality, as well as the links to the We Need Diverse Books campaign, which is simply diversebooks.org, Children's Book Council, which is cbcbooks.org. It's a really fantastic website where you can sign up for monthly newsletters that address unique and diverse authors and points of view in children's and youth literature. If you are responsible for programming and event coordination at your public library, you want to familiarize yourself with the website pps.org, Project for Public Spaces. It gives there are many, many resources, but one is an article that gives 8 bullet points for how to create and bring diverse programming to your small community. This brings us to the end of the 3 questions that were submitted for today's training, do we have any questions about the last topic on diversity and inclusion that anybody would like to discuss? If you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box at this time. And as we're moving towards the end of today's training, I would like to have opportunity for us to all reflect and share about our experiences working in public libraries. In addition to the 3 questions submitted, I received the following thoughts from a new librarian. The email received said, I'm a brand new children's librarian and youth librarian. I don't know all of the challenges that will come up, but exposure to the ones that other librarians have faced will be helpful when determining what to expect. Therefore, at this time, you could please share your favorite professional resources in the chat. Please share URLs, titles of journals, magazines, blogs, podcasts, anything and everything that you turn to help plan for your collection, your programs, your outreach, or just tackling tough questions as has been discussed in today's training. Please also share why you like this resource. That would be very helpful. We will also create a curated list of all of these resources as a handout to send to participants after today's training. We give just a few more minutes for folks to type into the chat. There are people typing, so I'll give a few more minutes. Feel free to also use this time if you have any thoughts that have come up since we have moved on from our previous topics. We have plenty of time to address them. All right, we have somebody who shared a resource. They said, CareKiss is my favorite professional journal for reviews. It is honest and makes a point to note diversity. Yes, CareKiss is one of the oldest academic journals dedicated to the study of children's and teen literature. They also typically will present reviews of literature from outside the U.S. publishing market, and just really diverse titles that you typically may not see in more traditional places like school library journal. Thank you for sharing that. We have a few more folks typing in, so we'll give them another few seconds to respond. Oh, this is a great comment too. Don't forget about patrons as resources. I've had a dad bring 2 real baby calves to the front yard of our library for story time, and I plan to use a lady who raises lambs and sheep to visit the library with lambs. That is a great recommendation. Yes, when you know your community, they can also be great sources of inspiration as well as program and service partners. A few more comments being typed in at this time. Move on to the next slide. If you have suggestions for topics or questions that were not discussed in today's training, we would love to hear them now, since this is the first time we've ever attempted a webinar and training of this format. We'd love to be able to continue to offer this type of training in the future. So please let us know, how can KBLA support you and your continuing education moving forward? While we're thinking about this question, we have another comment in the chat. Someone said they also find Facebook groups helpful to interact with other librarians in youth services and around the country. Yes, that is a great recommendation. I'll include some of those in the handout. Popular groups include Storytime Underground and Teen Services Think Tank. Both are just collaboratives of various youth-serving library professionals across the country. The groups are not necessarily affiliated with the American Library Association, but they are a great space to cross-promote and exchange programming and service ideas. A few more people typing in. While we are typing in, I will remind you of some resources available on KDLA's website where you can connect with your peers across the state to ask questions and share great resources. If you are already not on here, please do subscribe to the Kayak Listserv. It stands for Kentucky Young Adults and Children. It is a discussion email list devoted to those who work with children and teens at the library. To join the list, simply send an email with the subject KYAC, or Kayak for short, to the KDLA Youth Services Consultant. In the body of the message, list your name and the name of your library, and you will be emailed instructions for posting to this moderated discussion list. KDLA has several other listservs dedicated to technology, adult programming and services, as well as bookmobile and outreach, and they can all be found on our staff development resources pages. We also have a dedicated youth services page under the library programs heading on KDLA's website. Here you can go and find out information about our circulating book kits. We have classroom sets of book titles from preschool all the way through high school. These include class sets of books, and when available, an audiobook, a large type book, and an in-depth author guide and discussion guide. We also have thematic program kits, everything from interactive mystery kits that are similar to the popular breakout rooms being seen today, all the way to preschool and school readiness science kits. You can also find out information about other partnerships and more by visiting the website. We also have a dedicated page as we approach to the kickoff of summer reading. So just again, simply visit the Librarians tab under Library Programs. You can also access the summer reading page from the Youth Services website. You can also follow the Continuing Education and Library Development branch of KDLA on social media. We are on Twitter at KDLA LibDev, that's at KDLA LIBDEV, and we're also on Facebook. Search under KDLA CE. Since we have a few more questions that have come in at this time, I'm going to go back to our previous sharing screen. Someone suggested that they would like to learn how to get teens into the library. The anime club and game nights are not drawing in the teens. I would really like to see more teens come in and take advantage of what the library has to offer. If anybody has suggestions that they would like to share at this time, please go ahead and put in the chat. I will say this is something common we hear, but there are lots of barriers as to why teens and even many adults may not be able to get to the library. As we showed on a previous slide about poverty in the United States, which unfortunately is growing. If you're having struggles with that, you may not have reliable access to transportation. So transportation can become a real barrier. What can your library do to address issues of transportation, and how can you take library services out to those who physically cannot get into your community? So that is a great topic for even a further dive for future training. There was a question about thematic story hour kits. Do they have to be picked up in Frankfurt, or can they be delivered to the libraries? We are happy to report that the KYVL courier service is back up and running. More information about the courier service can be found by visiting the web pages on checking out the thematic program and text express kits. At this time, I'm going to move into our outro layout. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Remember, we typically have a 1-week turnaround on getting out certificates and the archived recording. I'd really encourage you to please help us keep IMLS funding for this and future KDLA training. You'll see that there is a box directly to the left of the chat that says survey. If you click on the link at this time, that's titled Survey Monkey, and click your button Browse To, it will pop up an additional screen where you can take a brief 2 to 3 minute survey about today's webinar experience. Don't forget, you can download today's slides as well as various handouts related to all the topics we talked about today. There's a guide to the YALSA Teen Competencies Report, a guide from Web Junction on racial equality for libraries, a list of the 40 developmental assets from the Search Institute, and a sample unattended use policy provided by KDLA's state librarian. All of those are available in the files download box to the bottom left-hand side of the screen. I will momentarily end the recording for this webinar, but I will stick around and chat if there are any further questions. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and I hope you have a great day.